Well, there it is. The nightmare we've dreaded for weeks has finally become reality, but life still goes on as normal. The Earth's still spinning, the sun's still coming up, Theo Hernandez is still picking up red cards, everything's still pretty much going on as normal. But the question that needs to be answered is this: what happens next? And I'm gonna get my 4 takeaways from today's match, or this whole situation. You guys know how this works. Green boxes for good performances, red boxes for bad ones. And the first takeaway from this whole situation can't be a red or a green box. It's just a discussion on Inter. And here's the part that makes us uncomfortable, but we have to accept, is that Inter have been the best team in this league and they're the deserved champions for the season. But the fact of the matter is that their project has always been ahead of Milan's project. They're not the best team this season, and that's why they won the title. They have been one of the best teams, if not the best team in the league, for almost half a decade now. Go back to the 2019-2020 season, the last time that Juventus won the Serie A title, their 9th consecutive Serie A title. Guess who finished in second place? One of the best teams in the league. How far were they of Juventus? 1 point. The season after that, in 2020-21, Inter comfortably finished the season winning the title by a 12-point margin ahead of Milan. And the season where Milan actually won the Serie A title, a lot of fans like to talk about how Pioli got lucky. You don't get lucky over 38 games. If after 38 games you win the scudetto, you're the deserved winner of that trophy. But who was right behind Milan? Once again, Inter lost that title by 2 points. And you go into last season, a slight anomaly of a season. They finished in 3rd place, but during the last 20 matches of the season, you could see that Inter were the better team, even ahead of Napoli. It's just that Napoli had created such a big lead, no one could really surpass them. And for that reason, Inter also chose to focus their energy on actually trying to win the Champions League instead of really fighting for the Serie A. And this time around, from game 1 to game 33, the nerazzurri have been the best team in the league. Now, why has their project been ahead of Milan's? I mean, that could pretty much be a whole video on its own, but you have to keep some things in mind. Inter have had the same ownership group since pretty much 2018. In that same span of time, Milan has had 3 different owners. That brings a lot of instability. That brings a lot of limitations around how much money is being spent. That also brings a lot of confusion around who's in charge of recruitment in this team. You've had 3 different levels of people taking care of recruitment. And keep in mind, the players that you're trying to recruit, they look at the situation and circumstance of your club and sometimes just want to stay away. Milan wasn't making Champions League consistently, or at all really. They had an ownership structure during the same period of time that Inter has been so dominant that was constantly changing. Inter were also prioritizing spending a lot of money. At one point in time, that club had $600 million in debt, which is what forced the departure of Antonio Conte, the sale of Hakimi, the sale of their star players. And during that same period of time, Milan has had more of a focus to try and stabilize their financial situation. Keep in mind, guys, this was a club that pretty much defaulted on its loan and had to be taken over by the banks. So the trajectory that these two teams have had, Inter with a little bit more stability in their ownership, being more free spenders and recruiting high profiles, while at the same time, Milan having 3 different ownership groups in the same period of time, not wanting to be a club that spends, but instead focuses on financial sustainability and slowly build that foundation where you can eventually start spending more money. These are not excuses or explanations or even justifications. This is just highlighting what has happened in the last 6 years with these 2 clubs. The one area that frustrates me is recruitment of free agents. Inter has done a far better job than Milan, and because you don't have to spend money on big transfer fees or massive agent commissions in those situations, you would have hoped that Milan, with its history, would have been able to recruit more players compared to Inter, especially considering the fact that the player that has scored in both the derbies this season in Marcus Thuram was a free agent that Milan had pretty much pocketed, and right at the last minute, Inter were able to snatch him away and win a title with the guy. Now, I do believe that the system that Milan is creating, the financial foundation that they're trying to set up, the sustainable spending habits that they're trying to create, I do believe that a system like that will pay off more long-term than one created where they're accumulating hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. But the important thing to keep in mind is that in this decade, Inter has by far been the best team in Serie A. And as the commentator mentioned, every single team, every top team will want to win and win the title at the end of the season. But sometimes you have to accept that the opposition that is in front of you, they're just better than you. And that was the case today. That has been the case in the recent past with Inter and Milan. And that's something I just feel the need to point out. This is not some one-off win that Inter has had. And that's why it's paying off with back-to-back trophies in 3 different seasons, winning the Serie A title and being a Champions League finalist. Which brings me to the second takeaway from today's match. And this one has to be for our coach and Stefano Pioli. At the end of the day, guys, that second goal scored by Marcus Thuram, that was the final nail in the coffin of Stefano Pioli's time at AC Milan. And as I mentioned in my previous video, the entire video was dedicated to Pioli and why his time appropriately, with all the appreciation for the 19th title, for the good time that he has shown this Milan team after suffering through the Banter era, it's just that that cycle has now come to an end. and it's time for Milan to make a coaching change. The one thing that still frustrates me about the coach is the formation and the lineup that he decided to start with today. At the end of the day, guys, the changes that Milan has made when playing against Roma in the Europa League, and the changes that Milan played once again today against Inter, you start to just feel like if the coach is making these many changes in 3 consecutive matches, if the players see the coach coming in every training session over a span of 10 days and coming up with 3 different systems to play, you almost feel like you have doubts about the coach himself. You start to wonder, is he even confident in what he's trying to do? Or is he just trying to throw some different stuff at the wall and see what sticks? Because the changes that Milan made around Yunus Musa, suddenly Pioli falls in love with Yunus. Suddenly Rafael Leao, who we have Lord knows for how long cried about that he shouldn't be playing as a center forward, in 32 matches of the season, never played as a number 9. Suddenly today, in a Milan derby of this type of importance, starts up front. And you know what the strange part is? That in the beginning of the match, maybe for the first 15 to 20 minutes, there was a style of play that Milan had. They were actually looking not too bad with the system that they were trying to play. But as soon as Inter scored that goal, the entire thing fell apart. This team once again looked as confused as it has in the past when a team opened scoring on them. They suddenly were completely getting outplayed. Inter were dominating possession. They were creating more and more chances. It was just a good fortune that Milan didn't lose the first half itself 3-0 or 4-0. And then strangely enough, when Inter scored their second goal and Stefano Pioli decided to make the changes that he did, Milan pretty much went back to the system that has worked for them well in the past. They went back to the Leao on the left, Chukwueze on the right, Giroud playing up front, the midfield lining up in a certain manner. Even the commentator mentioned at one point in time that Simone Inzaghi has one style of play and he tweaks around his style of play depending on the opposition, but the team doesn't drastically change itself. With Milan, in the last 10 days, as I mentioned, we've seen 3 completely different styles of play from the side. You almost get the sense at times, especially in the match against Roma, that the coach is making tactical changes just to make tactical changes, not with much of a purpose in them. And the not so surprising part is that in these 3 matches that he's made all these changes, you've picked up a draw and 2 losses. The fact of the matter is that at this point in time, guys, it's too little too late. Stefano Pioli's time at Milan is done. Jerry Cardinal, for whatever reason, has been in Milan for these games. He watched the derby today. He watched the match against Roma. He has seen this team fall apart in front of his own eyes. And there's no doubt in my mind that at this point in time, Milan fans included just want the season to end. There's nothing really left to play for. We'll make Champions League football, maybe try and fight for second place. But come the end of the season, Jerry Cardinal, I can guarantee you, will fire Stefano Pioli. And the third takeaway from today's match is the individual players on the field. There was, some chatter about how it wasn't fair to criticize Yunus Musa. The fact that he played against Roma, he was actually okay. Even in today's match, he was okay. That's not really the point. It's not about criticism of Musa himself as a player. The criticism is about the fact that we don't need him to be playing that role. We have better players to be able to play that role. There are a lot of matches throughout the entirety of the season where Davide Calabria has looked good as well. But as Milan fans, we recognize that he's not the best player to be playing right back and captaining this team. We can find a better quality right back and replace him with them. It's the same thing with Olivier Giroud. He scored a bunch of goals this season. He's one of the highest goal scorers in the league. He's also probably the highest assist maker in the league. But everybody as a Milan fan, you watch and you realize we can find somebody better than him. And that's the part that we've been critical about Yunus Musa. It's not about his individual play and say, well, he played well. Why are you complaining about Musa? He played well. No. We don't need him to be playing that role. We have players who can do a much better job than him in that role. And the fact that the coach has started to develop this sudden new infatuation with this player, it's frustrating because in the matches that he has been playing these roles, we have lost. And this isn't even about Yunus Musa in particular. It's about how these players are being played, including Ruben Loftus-Cheek. I'm tired of seeing him playing behind the striker. He doesn't need to play that role. It was good for about 10 games when we were playing against the smaller sides. It doesn't really give us much of a benefit when we're playing against a stronger opposition. He becomes a pretty much shadow on the middle of the field. He doesn't really do anything. He can't really help on the midfield because he's playing to advance. When he's playing advance, the opposition's defenders keep him pretty much quiet. So it's like having 10 players playing on the field for you. And I'm not really sure why Stefano Pioli at times with some of these players rewards good performances with the bench. We've seen what happened with Luka Jovic. There was a phase of time where he was scoring goals consistently. The way that he was rewarded was he just started sitting on the bench more and more. And it's the same thing with Samuel Chukwueze. He's probably hit his best phase before that Sassuolo match for about 3 to 4 games. And the way that he was rewarded by the coach, gets no playtime. And even with Rafael Leao, there was criticism about Leao as to how he wasn't doing enough on the field today, wasn't running enough or pressing enough. Somehow, in spite of all of that, he's still the guy who created the goal for you today. You look at the match against Roma, all that criticism for Rafael Leao, once again, the only guy that made that assist. So we can complain about him not running or him not pressing. He's still the man in your attack who's actually creating something. And it's the same thing with a certain section of the fan base about Christian Pulisic, talking about how when it comes to playing against bigger sides, Pulisic completely shies away. He's a shadow of himself. But here's the thing with Pulisic. I'm not going to blame the guy. The guy has 20 goal contributions at this point in time. When it comes to the big games, we have a coaching problem. We can't blame Yunus Musa. The coach chose to play him today and against Roma. We can't blame Rafael Leao. The coach suddenly decided to play him as a number 9 in the 33rd match of the season. We can't blame Christian Pulisic. Clearly he can score and assist goals because he's done about 20 times this season. It's just against the bigger sides, the coach in a way doesn't really know how to utilize him. Because at the end of the day, guys, the coach has shown that he doesn't really know how to utilize any of the team really against the bigger sides or in the important matches. So for me, quite honestly, you look at any phase of the game, you look at the attacking part, Milan doesn't really score much in big games. You look at the midfield, we almost don't have one. We play a 5-0-5 formation. And you look at the defense, even though we load up the defense in the backside, we somehow still constantly end up conceding goals. So to me, I see individual quality in these players. We know who Mike Maignan is. We know Tomori has quality. Gabi has come back as a different player. Theo Hernandez is an international player who played in the World Cup final for his team. Rangers is getting starts for the Dutch side. Rafael has a starter for Portugal. Christian Pulisic captains his side. Noah Okafor is the highest scorer off the bench this season. This team is a good team, but the system that is being created by this coach is just not working for these individual pieces. So for me, the blame lies much less in the individual materials used in the structure and much more with the architect who designed it. And for that reason, fans blaming Yunus Musa or Rafael Leao, Loftus-Cheek or Christian Pulisic, I feel like at this point in time, we have to blame the tactician and the tactics much more than we have to blame the players. And the final takeaway from today's match, this one has to be a word to Jerry Cardinale. The one thing that Jerry Cardinale has to remember is that the background in baseball that he comes from is very different from football. In baseball, the manager is more of a support system. He's more of a psychologist for the team. At the end of the day, the player has to step up into the box and actually be able to connect the ball with the bat. But in football, the manager is more of a puppet master. He's the one who decides how the players move, which direction they go in. What do they do when a team is attacking against them? Not psychologically, but literally on the field, how you position yourself and you change your role. He's been at the stadium watching the performance against Roma. He's been at the stadium today watching the performance against Inter. Those matches from a coaching perspective by an experienced coach in Simone Inzaghi and an inexperienced coach who's only been a coach for 3 months in Daniele De Rossi, Jerry Cardinale must have been able to see what type of a difference a coach can make to the team. You look at what Roma was like under Jose Mourinho, you look at what Roma is like under Daniele De Rossi, you can tell that a coach alone can actually change the entire outcome of the team. And the same example applies to Stefano Pioli and Thiago Motta. If Milan goes to Rome, plays at the Olimpico against a Roma side and cannot extract anything from that match and loses a consequential match in the Europa League, and then Thiago Motta's Bologna, who's by far a weaker side, individual players compared that to what Milan has, he goes to Rome in an important match in a Champions League qualification clash, and he picks up a 3-1 win away from home. The reason why he's able to do that is because Bologna is a far better coach team than Milan is. So seeing the outcomes in these matches, it must be clear to Jerry Cardinale that at this point in time, a new tactician for this team is exactly what it needs. And to close it off, there's some people talking about how none of the players have come out and actually criticized Stefano Pioli, which we don't really even see happening in a lot of other teams. Mostly at the end of the season, the coaches just let go of. But you have to keep in mind where this team comes from. Guys, at the end of the day, Stefano Pioli's time at Milan, a 5-year tenure at Milan, has exceeded any of the expectations we had. We had no idea when he was brought on that Milan's going to finish runners-up 2 different times, make a Champions League semifinal, and win a Serie A trophy with this coach. During those dark days of Marco Giampaolo, if any of us were told that this is what Stefano Pioli's time at Milan would look like, we would have actually taken it. And in my opinion, that's why the players don't criticize him. Keep in mind, a lot of these players were simply average players before Stefano Pioli came to this club. And a lot of these average players or lesser known players or rejected players from other clubs during the tenure of Stefano Pioli have gone from average players or lesser known players to international stars. They recognize the role that Stefano Pioli has played in their turnaround of their own careers. And that's why they don't come out and say anything against him. But one thing is clear, if these average players or lesser known players turn into international stars, if they now want to become perennial winners or international superstars, it's going to have to be under the guidance of a new tactician. And as always, especially in a loss this significant, Forza Milan, grazie mille, ciao tutti. Did you know Benito Mussolini put an end to the existence of Inter Milan? And the only reason why AC Milan is called what it is because of the fascist leader? What led to the breakup of AC Milan and Inter Milan in that restaurant behind the Duomo is fascinating in itself. But what is even more fascinating